The Georgia summer air was heavy, thick with humidity and tension. The sky hung low over Atlanta like a weary parent watching children fight a battle they didn't understand. Officer Daniel Carter sat alone in his patrol car on the edge of the neighborhood known locally as East Gate, a place many officers avoided unless absolutely necessary. Daniel didn't avoid it. In fact, he volunteered to patrol there. Not out of duty. Not even to protect. But to maintain control. To prove something, to others, to himself. He adjusted his rearview mirror, then wiped sweat from his brow with a handkerchief he kept in his glove box. The air conditioner wheezed softly as the late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the sidewalk. East Gate was worn. Old brick buildings with chipped paint and sagging porches lined the street. Kids played basketball in the distance, their laughter a strange contradiction to the poverty around them. Carter had grown up in northern Georgia, in a town where the police were heroes, at least to the people who looked like him. He joined the force with ideals, justice, honor, courage. But somewhere in the chaos of the job, between domestic violence calls, drug busts, and the weight of the badge, the ideals blurred into fear and instinct. Over the years, he began to draw lines in his mind. Lines that divided good from bad. Us from them. And too often, those lines were drawn by skin color. Today, he had already issued 2 citations, broken up a fight at a gas station, and responded to a shoplifting call that turned out to be a homeless woman stealing baby formula. He had cuffed her anyway, more out of routine than necessity. The exhaustion of years on the job made it easy to see people as statistics. As he sipped his coffee, lukewarm now, he spotted someone unusual. A tall black man was walking slowly down the cracked sidewalk. He looked out of place. Not because of his skin. Most residents here were black, but because of how he carried himself. Calm. Upright. Like he had nowhere to hide and nothing to fear. He wore a white dress shirt, neatly ironed, tucked into black slacks. A polished watch gleamed on his wrist. He carried a leather briefcase. The kind that said he came from somewhere else. Somewhere better. Carter frowned. That kind of confidence didn't sit right with him. It wasn't the neighborhood for that. He watched as the man nodded at an old lady sitting on her porch. She smiled. He handed a little boy his bouncing basketball that had rolled into the street. A simple, kind gesture. Still, Carter felt his chest tighten. His instincts screamed that the man didn't belong, not because he was dangerous, but because he didn't fit the narrative Carter had built in his mind about who the people in this neighborhood were supposed to be. He pulled out into the street and rolled up alongside the man. "Hey!" he called, his voice sharp and unmistakably authoritative. The man turned, his face calm. "Good afternoon, officer." "You lost?" Carter asked, narrowing his eyes. "No, sir. I'm exactly where I need to be," the man replied, gently. Carter's lip curled slightly. Something about that tone, polite but firm, rubbed him the wrong way. "Where you headed?" Carter demanded. The man smiled faintly. "Just passing through. I appreciate your concern." Carter stepped out of his car and walked up to him slowly. "This isn't the kind of place people just pass through," he said, now close enough to smell the man's cologne, clean, subtle, expensive. "I believe it is," the man said, "if you're willing to see it differently." Carter's jaw clenched. He didn't like being challenged. Even politely. Especially not here, in a place he had claimed as his beat. "You think you're better than everyone else here?" he asked suddenly, his voice low and charged. "No, officer," the man said, eyes steady. "I think we're all better than how we're treated." That was it. Without thinking, without warning, Carter stepped forward and spat at the man's feet. The wet stain hit the polished leather shoes with a quiet splat. Gasps echoed from across the street. A few people had stopped to watch. A woman with a grocery bag stood frozen. A teenager recording with his phone lowered it slowly, shocked. The man looked down, then up again. His expression never changed. Not rage. Not fear. Just disappointment. Carter stared at him, suddenly aware of what he had done. Something inside him recoiled, but it was too late. The damage was done. The man didn't speak. He simply reached into his pocket, pulled out a clean white handkerchief, knelt down, and wiped the spit from his shoes. With grace. With dignity. Like he had done it before. Like he knew this wasn't about him. Then he stood up straight, nodded once at Carter, silent, not submissive, and walked away. Carter stood there, chest rising and falling, hands trembling slightly. He turned, climbed back into his patrol car, and sat in silence. For the first time in years, he didn't feel like a cop. He felt like a coward. He couldn't stop replaying the scene. The man's eyes. The way he hadn't retaliated. The way he had chosen restraint over revenge. Who was he? That night, Carter went home to his small apartment just outside the city. He stripped off his uniform slowly, as if it weighed 100 pounds. The television flickered in the background, but he wasn't watching. His wife had left him 2 years ago, tired of his bitterness and cold silences. He didn't blame her. He didn't blame anyone anymore. Except himself. He opened the fridge, pulled out a beer, then set it down unopened. He looked at the mirror above the sink. His own reflection stared back, tired eyes, salt and pepper hair, frown lines etched deep into his face. He had once wanted to be a hero. Now, he couldn't even look himself in the eye. The next day passed in a blur. He filed reports, responded to calls, avoided conversations. But he couldn't escape the guilt. Every time he passed a black man on the street, he saw him. The stranger. The one who hadn't fought back. The one who had responded to hate with grace. On the third day, they were all called into the precinct's main hall. A new police chief was being introduced. The room buzzed with speculation. Officers whispered about how the city council had brought in someone from out of state. A reformer. Someone to clean house. Carter stood near the back, arms crossed. He expected someone stiff, political, maybe an academic. What he didn't expect was the man who walked through the double doors. Every breath left his lungs in an instant. It was him. The same man he had humiliated. The one he had spat on. He walked with the same quiet confidence. The same calm. He wore a dark suit this time, with a crisp white shirt and no tie. His smile was composed, measured. Not proud. Not smug. Just, kind. Captain Rodriguez stepped forward. "Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to introduce you to your new chief of police, Mr. David Langston." Silence gripped the room like a vice. Langston took the podium. His eyes scanned the sea of uniforms. When they landed on Carter, they stopped, but just for a moment. He began to speak. And with every word, the room leaned in. "My name is David Langston. I've served in 3 departments across 2 states. I've led, I've followed, I've learned. And I've come here not just to change a department, but to change a culture. I believe in justice. But I also believe in grace. In second chances. In humanity." Carter stared at the floor. He felt like the ground might open and swallow him whole. Langston could have humiliated him in front of everyone. Exposed him. But he didn't. He never even mentioned it. After the speech, the officers lined up to greet the new chief. Carter slipped out a side door, his stomach in knots. But before he could make it to his car, a voice called out behind him. "Officer Carter." He turned slowly. Langston stood alone in the hallway, hands in his pockets. "We need to talk," he said. Carter nodded, heart pounding. In that moment, he knew his life was about to change. The hallway outside the precinct briefing room felt colder than it should have. Officer Carter stood with his back straight, but everything inside him wavered like a flame in the wind. He faced Chief Langston silently, uncertain whether to brace for consequences or confess before they even spoke. Langston didn't immediately say anything. He just looked at him, calm, composed, but sharp. His eyes didn't hold anger. Not even disappointment. Instead, they carried something far heavier, expectation. "I recognized you right away," Langston finally said. "Didn't think I'd have to introduce myself twice in the same week." Carter swallowed hard. "Sir, I..." Langston raised a hand gently. "Not here. Walk with me." They stepped out of the precinct, walking side by side down the quiet city sidewalk. The sun had started to dip, bathing everything in a golden haze. Cars hummed by. The world, unbothered by their moment, just kept moving. They walked for a few blocks in silence until Langston led them into a small neighborhood park. There were a few benches, a rusted jungle gym, and an old water fountain that coughed before it flowed. "I grew up around here," Langston said, motioning toward the low-income housing units lining the street. "That building over there, apartment 2B. My mother raised 3 of us there working double shifts as a nurse's aide." Carter listened, unsure of what to say or how to even begin making things right. "I used to walk these streets barefoot some summers," Langston continued, his voice soft. "Got beat up more than once for books in my hand instead of a ball. But I always told myself I'd come back, different. Better." He stopped walking and turned to Carter. "And then the other day," he said slowly, "I walked through East Gate again, proud of who I'd become, ready to serve the people who raised me. I didn't expect a hero's welcome. But I didn't expect to be dehumanized either." Carter looked away, shame burning behind his eyes. Langston nodded as if he understood. "Let me guess," he said. "You didn't think someone like me belonged there. Dressed too well. Walked too proud. Made you uncomfortable." "I don't know what came over me," Carter muttered. "I've been on this job too long. Things blur together. I wasn't thinking. It just happened." Langston gave him a long look. "Everything you've ever done just happened?" "No," Carter said quietly. "You've been with the force how long?" 16 years. "And how many of those years did you stop seeing people as people?" Langston asked, not accusingly, but with genuine curiosity. Carter opened his mouth, but nothing came out. He realized he didn't know. He couldn't remember the last time he had looked at a person without a label attached: suspect, threat, nuisance. The badge had become a wall between him and the world. And it had hardened him into someone he never intended to be. "I'm not here to ruin you," Langston said. "I'm not going to make a spectacle out of you or fire you for what you did. But I need to know something important." Carter met his eyes, bracing. "Do you want to change?" Langston asked. The question cut deeper than punishment ever could. Carter hesitated. Then, slowly, he nodded. "I don't want to be the man I was the other day," he said. "I haven't wanted to be him for a while now, but I didn't know how to stop." Langston nodded slowly, reading the sincerity in his face. "Then we start from there." They sat on the bench for a long while as the evening turned to dusk. Langston spoke about the kind of department he wanted to build, one grounded in trust, community, and actual protection. Not power. Not fear. He wanted officers who understood the neighborhoods they patrolled, not feared them. Who walked among the people, not above them. "I need people willing to unlearn and relearn," he said. "You've got 16 years of muscle memory. It won't be easy. But if you're willing, I'll give you the chance." Carter nodded again, slower this time. His throat felt tight. He wasn't used to being offered grace. Especially not from someone he had hurt. Over the next few weeks, everything began to shift. Langston implemented reforms that ruffled feathers across the department. He introduced community liaison programs, required racial bias training, and began auditing old complaints with transparency. Some officers mocked him behind his back. Some filed transfers. But others, especially the younger ones, leaned in. They saw something in Langston that the city had forgotten in its law enforcement: humanity. And Carter? He was assigned to one of the new community patrol teams, walking, not driving. He was paired with a local black pastor named Jerome who knew every alley, every face, every grandmother on the block. At first, Carter resisted the idea, thinking it a punishment. But Langston had smiled and said, "Consider it a classroom." Jerome was kind but didn't sugarcoat anything. "I know who you are," he had told Carter on their first walk. "I saw the video. Half the city did. But I also know people can change, if they want it bad enough." Carter listened more than he talked. He met people he had only seen before in the blur of sirens and arrest reports. He helped an elderly woman fix her porch railing. He played basketball with a group of teenagers who had once run from his cruiser. He attended a memorial for a shooting victim and stayed long after the crowd had left, sweeping up trash in silence. One afternoon, while walking with Jerome, a little girl ran up to them holding a drawing. It was crayon on paper, crude but vibrant. "I made this for you," she said, handing it to Carter. He looked at it. It was a picture of two stick figures, one in a blue uniform, the other in a dress shirt, standing side by side, smiling, with a heart above them. Below it were the words, "Thank you for coming back." He knelt down to her level, blinking back the wetness in his eyes. "What's your name?" he asked. "Amari," she said proudly. "Thank you, Amari," he whispered. That night, Carter didn't drink. He sat on his porch with the drawing in his hands and realized something simple but profound: healing begins where honesty starts. He started attending Langston's leadership development sessions. He read books on empathy, race, and history, ones he had scoffed at before. He didn't always agree, didn't always understand, but he stayed. He asked questions. He listened. And slowly, his reputation began to shift. The same communities that once crossed the street when they saw him now nodded hello. The teenagers called him Mr. D and challenged him to games he always lost but never backed out of. He wasn't perfect. He still made mistakes. Sometimes his old instincts crept in. But each time, he paused. He questioned. He made amends. One day, after nearly 4 months, Langston called him into his office. Carter entered, standing tall but humble. "You've come a long way," Langston said, motioning for him to sit. "I've got a long way to go," Carter replied. "We all do," Langston said. Then he leaned forward. "There's something I want you to consider. We're launching a pilot mentorship program for young recruits. Officers who've walked through fire and come out better. I want you to lead it." Carter's eyes widened. "Me? You've lived both sides," Langston said. "You know what it means to lose yourself and fight to get back. That's exactly what they need." Carter sat quietly, the weight of the offer settling in. "I'll do it," he said finally. "But only if you promise to keep pushing me. I still need the fire." Langston smiled. "The fire's already in you. I just gave it direction." That evening, Carter walked out of the precinct, the same building he had once felt trapped in, and looked up at the sky. The city lights had started to blink on, one by one, chasing away the darkness. For the first time in years, he felt like he belonged, to the badge, to the city, to himself. Spring had arrived in the city, but it wasn't just the flowers that signaled change. There was a different energy in the air, one that stirred in corners long forgotten by hope. Street murals bloomed on abandoned buildings. Community gardens replaced vacant lots. And the police department, once seen as a symbol of division, began to reflect something far more powerful: trust earned, not demanded. Officer Derek Carter stood before a group of fresh recruits in a classroom lined with old precinct plaques and dusty commendation photos. The room smelled of linoleum and coffee, just as it had for years, but the silence was different now. People were listening, not because of his badge, but because of his journey. He didn't start with lectures or statistics. He started with a question. How many of you joined to protect people? Every hand went up. He nodded. And how many of you know what it feels like to be feared by the very people you swore to protect? There was hesitation. A few raised their hands halfway. Others shifted uncomfortably. That's what we're going to talk about, Carter said. Not just what this job is, but what it does to you, and what you choose to do with it. He told them about the day he spat on a man he didn't know. He told them about how that moment nearly defined him. About Chief Langston. About the mirror he was forced to look into, and what he saw. No uniform will ever make you more human, he said. But it can make you forget how human everyone else is. Don't let it. Later that afternoon, as the recruits filed out, one young officer, Rodriguez, paused at the door. "Sir," she said, "I just wanted to say thank you. For being real." Carter smiled. "We've got enough masks in this city. No room for more." Weeks passed, then months. Word of the program spread. Officers from neighboring precincts came to observe. Community members volunteered to participate. Formerly incarcerated men and women sat in circles with cops and shared their stories. Tears were shed. Hands were shaken. Bridges, once burned, were slowly rebuilt. And then came the mayor's announcement: the city would hold its first Unity Day, a massive community police celebration to mark 1 year since Chief Langston's appointment. Food trucks, music, local art, and speeches from residents who had seen the change firsthand. Langston approached Carter one morning with a request. "I want you to speak," he said. "Tell your story. All of it." Carter hesitated. "You sure that's a good idea? Some people still remember what I did." "They need to know how far you've come," Langston replied. "People believe in change because they see it. You are it." On the day of the event, the city square overflowed with people. Children ran with painted faces, elders sat on lawn chairs beneath sun umbrellas, and families lined up for plates of barbecue and jerk chicken. Local bands played. Poetry was read. A mural was unveiled with the faces of residents, first responders, and community leaders, together in color and spirit. Carter stood behind the podium, nerves buzzing. He looked out at the sea of faces, some familiar, some skeptical, all waiting. He cleared his throat. "My name is Officer Derek Carter. And I'm here today not because I was perfect, but because I wasn't." The crowd stilled. "I made a mistake that no badge can excuse. I looked at a man, Chief Langston, and I saw everything I feared, not everything he was. I acted out of ignorance, not strength. And I caused pain." He paused, breath catching in his chest. "But that same man looked at me and saw someone worth saving. Not because I earned it. But because he believed in something this city had almost forgotten: redemption." He looked toward Langston, who stood in the front row, arms folded, eyes steady. "I stand here today not to erase what I did," Carter continued, "but to show what can happen when we face the worst in ourselves and choose better. I've walked with neighbors I once passed by. I've learned names I never knew. I've played street ball with kids who used to run from me. I've broken bread with men I used to fear." A murmur of emotion swept through the crowd. "This isn't about me," he said. "It's about us. About what happens when we stop seeing uniforms and start seeing hearts. When we listen before judging. When we offer grace instead of punishment." He stepped back, heart pounding. For a moment, there was silence. Then applause. Louder than he expected. And from the front row, Langston led a standing ovation. Afterward, people approached him. Some shook his hand. Some hugged him. Some simply nodded with eyes that said, "I see you now." Later that evening, as the sun dipped behind the skyline, Carter wandered over to the mural. He stood in front of it for a while, hands in his pockets. A familiar voice called from behind. "Look good in paint, don't you?" It was Jerome, the pastor who had walked those first hard days with him. He stood with a smile, his granddaughter Amari skipping beside him, still clutching a balloon. Carter chuckled. "Never thought I'd end up in art." Jerome leaned closer. "The good kind always does." They stood in silence, watching families dance and laugh under string lights. "I used to think I'd spend the rest of my life proving I wasn't the man I was that day," Carter said. Jerome placed a hand on his shoulder. "You already have." That night, Carter drove home, rolling down the windows to feel the spring air. His badge sat on the passenger seat, not as a symbol of power, but as a reminder of responsibility. A reminder of the man he chose to become. At a red light, a teenager on a skateboard pulled up beside him, nodded, and said, "Yo, Officer D. You comin' back for the rematch tomorrow?" Carter smiled. "You better bring your A-game." The light turned green, and he drove on, not away from his past, but forward into a future shaped by every hard step he had taken. A future where a single act of compassion changed not just one man, but an entire city.